The weeks rolled on, and the restaurant settled into a new rhythm. What had once been an ordinary dining spot was now quietly becoming known for its warmth and care. Guests began to notice not just the food, but the atmosphere, the way the staff greeted them, the calm patience in the service, and the gentle touches that made them feel valued. And at the heart of this change was James, the waiter who had once nearly ruined everything with a careless insult. For James, every shift now felt like a test and a chance. He arrived early, checked the tables, polished glasses until they sparkled, and reminded himself of the simple rules that Big Shaq had drilled into him: smile, name, one suggestion, thank you. These weren't just words anymore. They had become his compass. Each guest who walked through the door was treated like someone important. It didn't matter if they wore a suit or casual clothes, whether they ordered the most expensive steak or just a bowl of soup, everyone received the same respect. It wasn't always easy. There were still difficult guests, still long hours, and still nights when James's feet ached. But he had learned something important: his attitude shaped the experience, not just for customers, but for himself. If he chose bitterness, the night became heavy. If he chose respect, the night became lighter, even joyful. Slowly, his co-workers began to notice the difference. They saw how James listened, how he handled complaints with patience, and how he encouraged them to do the same. One Friday evening, a family with young children came in. The kids were restless, knocking over cutlery and giggling loudly. In the past, James would have groaned silently, frustrated at the extra work. But now, he crouched down at the children's level, smiled, and offered them crayons and paper from the host's stand. The parents looked relieved, thanking him with tired but grateful eyes. The small act turned what could have been a stressful dinner into a pleasant memory for the family. Later that same night, an elderly man dined alone. James noticed the man looking around, almost lonely. Instead of rushing past, James stopped for a moment and asked, "Would you like me to tell you about our chef's special tonight? It's something comforting." The man smiled, nodded, and ended up sharing a short story about how his late wife used to cook something similar. James listened with real attention, and by the end of the meal, the man left with a lighter heart. For James, it was a reminder that serving food was more than a transaction, it was human connection. Meanwhile, the guests who had witnessed the incident weeks ago began to return. Some of them quietly asked the staff, "Is that the same waiter?" And when they saw how much he had changed, they left kind notes or generous tips, telling the manager how impressed they were. Word spread quietly, and reviews online began to mention James's name in a positive light. Big Shaq, though busy with his other work, often visited unannounced. Sometimes he sat in a corner, observing silently. Other times, he walked around, greeting guests and chatting with the staff. He never failed to watch James closely. And each time, he saw not the bitter young man he had met before, but someone growing into maturity. One evening, after closing, Shaq called James aside. "You've done well," he said in his deep, steady voice. "Not because you're perfect, you're not. But because you've learned. That's what matters." James nodded, humbled. "Thank you for giving me a second chance. I didn't deserve it." Shaq smiled. "We all need second chances, James. The difference is whether we use them or waste them. You chose to use yours." That night, James walked home under the London lights, his steps lighter than they had been in months. He thought about how close he had come to losing everything. One careless remark could have cost him his job and his future. But instead, it had become the spark that pushed him to change. The lesson stayed with him: you never know who you are talking to, and you never know how much your words can matter. Respect costs nothing, but it can change everything. In time, James became more than just a waiter. He began helping new staff, teaching them the same simple rules that had saved him. He guided them through busy nights, reminded them to stay calm, and encouraged them to see guests as people, not burdens. Slowly, the restaurant became not just a place to eat but a place people wanted to return to again and again. And for James, the story of the night he insulted Big Shaq wasn't just a tale of embarrassment, it was the turning point of his life. What had started as shame had transformed into growth, and what could have been the end of his career became the beginning of a brighter future. He never forgot the lesson. Every time he greeted a guest, he remembered, a smile, a name, a kind word, and respect. That was enough to change a night, and sometimes, enough to change a life. The murmur inside the terminal grew louder as the boy sat there, still clutching his sketchbook like it was the only thing keeping him steady. The officers hadn't been unkind, but their presence made him feel cornered. Every question they asked, "Where's your ticket? Who are you waiting for? Why are you here?" made him feel like he had done something wrong. The boy's throat felt tight. His answers came out small, almost swallowed by the buzz of travelers moving through the airport. The pilot stood to the side, arms folded tightly across his chest, his expression firm as if he had made the right call. He kept glancing at the boy and then at the officers, nodding as though to reassure himself, "See, I was right to call them." To him, the boy was out of place, and that alone was enough reason to raise alarm. But the people around were beginning to notice more. Some leaned on their carry-ons, others slowed down instead of rushing to their gates. A mother holding her toddler whispered to her husband, "He looks like any other kid. Why are they surrounding him like that?" Her husband shook his head, keeping his voice low, because someone made a snap judgment. "Poor boy looks terrified." The boy tried again to explain. His voice shook but he spoke carefully, "My dad works here, he's coming. He knows I'm waiting. I just draw airplanes while I sit here. That's all." He opened his notebook a little, showing pages filled with sketches of planes, some big passenger jets, some tiny propeller planes. His lines were detailed, and even an aviation enthusiast would see the care in his drawings. But the pilot gave the notebook a quick glance and turned away dismissively, as if that didn't matter. "Anyone can say they're waiting for someone," the pilot said sharply. "It doesn't explain why he's just sitting in a secure area without a ticket. Better safe than sorry." His words were not shouted, but they carried a certain weight. And each time he said them, the boy's heart sank deeper. The officers exchanged looks. They weren't harsh men, and they could see the boy wasn't causing any trouble. Still, they felt they had to follow through since a pilot had raised the concern. One officer crouched again and said gently, "What's your father's name, son? Can we call him to confirm?" The boy nodded quickly, blurting out his father's name. His hands tightened around the notebook, his knuckles pale. "He's coming. Please, he's coming. He told me to wait here." Still, the officer's radio crackled as he stepped aside to report in. The pilot watched closely, his lips pressed tight. The situation was no longer small, it was turning into a spectacle. By now, more travelers had stopped to watch. A young college student nearby muttered, "That kid's not doing anything. He's literally just sitting there with a sketchbook." An older man in a business suit frowned, shaking his head in quiet disapproval. But the weight of authority still pressed hardest on the boy, not on the man who had made the call. The boy shifted in his chair, feeling the eyes of strangers on him. His sketchbook, once his joy, now felt like evidence being used against him. He wished he could shrink into the seat and disappear. In his mind, he thought of the times his father had walked him through the airport proudly, showing him the control towers, pointing out planes taking off. He always felt at home here. But now, for the first time, the airport felt hostile. Every second waiting felt heavier. His chest tightened, and he looked toward the sliding doors at the end of the terminal hallway, silently begging for his father to appear. One officer asked softly, "Do you want us to call your dad, son?" The boy shook his head quickly. No, he's on his way. Please, just wait a little. His voice was small but steady. The pilot rolled his eyes slightly and muttered, "This is exactly why we need to stay alert. Can't just let anyone sit here unchecked." He said it to no one in particular, but loudly enough for others to hear. His tone carried authority, as if he was reminding everyone around that he was protecting their safety. But for the people watching, his words didn't match what they saw. They didn't see a threat. They saw a child being treated like a problem because of assumptions. Some pulled out their phones, quietly recording. Others shook their heads, whispering to each other about fairness, about how it could just as easily be their own child in that chair. The boy swallowed hard, forcing himself not to cry. He wanted his father to see him strong, not scared. But inside, his heart raced. He thought of his father's words many times before, always stay calm. Always be respectful. The truth will stand for itself. He tried to hold on to those words now, even as the moment stretched unbearably long. And then, at last, footsteps echoed in the hallway. A tall figure in a dark suit appeared, moving quickly but with purpose. He carried an air of quiet authority, his ID badge hanging clearly around his neck. The boy's eyes brightened instantly. Relief flooded his chest. His father had arrived. The officers straightened slightly, recognizing the seriousness in the man's expression. The boy gripped his sketchbook tighter and stood up quickly, moving toward him. The father's eyes scanned the scene in a single sweep, his son standing nervously with two officers, the crowd watching, and the pilot standing apart with his arms still crossed. In that instant, everything became clear to him. The father placed a protective hand on his son's shoulder, his calm voice carrying more weight than a shout could ever hold. "What seems to be the problem here?" The atmosphere shifted. The boy, though still shaken, felt a rush of safety return as he stood by his father's side. And everyone watching sensed that this was no ordinary parent. They could feel authority in his presence. The real turning point was coming. Father's voice cut through the noise of the terminal like a steady hand calming stormy waters. He did not shout, but the authority in his tone made everyone turn their heads. His son stepped closer to him, relief plain on his face. The boy didn't need to say anything. His posture, the way he leaned slightly into his father's side, told the whole story of what had just happened before the man arrived. The officers, who moments earlier seemed confident in their questioning, now shifted on their feet. They sensed that this was no ordinary parent. The man's presence carried weight, and his badge, which hung clearly on his chest, was not one to be ignored. The pilot, however, cleared his throat and spoke before anyone else could. "Sir, I thought it was suspicious that your son was just sitting here alone without a ticket. I followed protocol. We can't take risks in secure areas." His words were firm, but his voice was not as sure as before. Something about the father's calm but commanding presence unsettled him. The father listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving the pilot's face. When the pilot finished, the man lowered his gaze briefly to his son, then looked back up. "You called the police on a child who was waiting for his father." "My son. And yes, he has every right to be here." His tone was still even, but each word landed with weight. The surrounding crowd, which had been silent, leaned in a little closer. Some were recording, some simply watching in quiet amazement. One of the officers finally spoke up, trying to ease the tension. "Sir, we were only responding to a call. We didn't mean any harm." "I understand," the father replied, turning his head toward the officers. "And I respect the work you do. But what I don't respect," he continued, turning slowly back to the pilot, "is assumptions that turn into accusations." The boy clutched his sketchbook, finally daring to speak, his voice quiet but steady. "Dad, I told them I was waiting for you. They didn't believe me." The father placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. I know. You did exactly the right thing. His voice softened briefly before it hardened again as he addressed the pilot. The pilot shifted uncomfortably, but still tried to justify himself. Sir, with respect, I was thinking about safety. You know how things are these days. It's better to be cautious than careless. The father's lips pressed into a thin line. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. Slowly, deliberately, he showed his official identification card. The gold lettering and insignia caught the light, and the crowd stirred. He spoke clearly enough for the officers, the pilot, and even the nearby passengers to hear. I am an FAA administrator. I oversee parts of the very system you work in, pilot. My job is to ensure safety and fairness in our skies and in our airports. And my son has every right to be here without being treated like a criminal. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the crackle of the officer's radio seemed muted. The pilot's face paled slightly, and he took a small step back. His arms, once tightly crossed in authority, now dropped loosely to his sides. He had not expected this. The father continued, his voice calm but cutting. Safety does not mean suspicion without cause. Safety does not mean calling police on children who don't fit your idea of who belongs. Safety means protecting everyone equally. A woman in the crowd, who had been quietly recording on her phone, whispered, "Wow," while a man near her nodded slowly in agreement. The officers, clearly aware of the mistake, straightened and tried to recover. "Sir, we apologize for the misunderstanding. We'll clear this up right away." But the father wasn't done. He looked straight at the pilot again. "I expect better from someone in your position. My son will not remember this airport as a place where he was humiliated for no reason. He will remember it as the day his father stood by him. But you," he paused, letting the silence hang, "you will remember it as the day you learned that making assumptions has consequences." The boy looked up at his father with wide eyes, not just relieved but proud. For the first time that morning, he felt taller, stronger, simply because his father was beside him, speaking with such clarity and conviction. The pilot opened his mouth as if to respond, but no words came. He finally muttered, I didn't realize." The father's eyes narrowed slightly. "That is exactly the problem." The terminal remained unusually still for a few more moments, the weight of the exchange hanging over everyone. Travelers who had been bystanders now understood they had witnessed more than just an airport incident. They had witnessed a lesson about fairness, dignity, and the power of calm authority. And for the boy, this was the moment that would forever remind him, his father was not only a figure of authority at work but also his greatest protector in life. The terminal, once filled with whispers and stares, grew heavier with silence. The father's words lingered in the air, his badge still catching the light as it hung from his jacket. Everyone had seen it. Everyone now understood who he was, not just a concerned parent, but an FAA administrator with authority that reached far beyond a single airport. The officers, recognizing the weight of the moment, stepped back slightly, their earlier confidence replaced with caution. One of them adjusted his belt nervously before speaking. "Sir, we truly apologize. We understand now. There was no intention to disrespect your son." The father gave a small nod. "I accept that you were doing your duty. But let this be clear, your duty is also to protect children like him from unnecessary humiliation. He should not have to defend his right to sit and wait in peace." The crowd murmured in agreement. Some passengers, who had been recording quietly on their phones, lowered them now, sensing the situation had shifted. A few even smiled at the boy, trying to reassure him silently that he was seen, that they were on his side. The pilot, however, stood frozen. His earlier confidence had drained, leaving behind only unease. He tried to form words, but they came out unsteady. I didn't know. I thought." The father turned to him sharply, but without raising his voice. You thought you knew who belonged here and who didn't. And you were wrong. He paused, letting that truth settle in. My son is not a threat. He is a boy who loves airplanes. A boy who spends his free time sketching wings and engines because one day, he dreams of flying. And instead of encouraging that dream, you made him feel like a suspect. The boy's cheeks warmed, both from pride and from the sting of the truth. He looked up at his father, then at the crowd, realizing for the first time that his sketches, once so private, had now become part of the story everyone was watching unfold. The pilot's shoulders slumped. I was only trying to follow safety protocol, he muttered weakly. Safety, the father repeated firmly, is not suspicion without reason. Safety is not fear of a child because of how he looks. Safety is treating everyone with fairness. His eyes narrowed slightly. And if you, as a pilot, do not understand that, then perhaps you need to be reminded of the standards you swore to uphold. The officers, eager to resolve the tension, quickly stepped in. Sir, we'll make sure this situation is cleared from our records. There won't be any problem moving forward. The father nodded again, but his attention stayed locked on the pilot. The silence stretched. For the first time, the man who had started the whole ordeal looked smaller, less certain of his place. His uniform, once a symbol of authority, now felt heavy on his shoulders. Finally, the father placed a gentle hand on his son's back and spoke to him instead. You've done nothing wrong. You held your ground. I am proud of you. The boy's eyes brightened. The tension in his chest loosened, replaced by a swell of pride he hadn't felt since the moment he sat down with his sketchbook. The crowd shifted again, some people nodding, others smiling warmly. A woman with a stroller called out softly, "You have a good father, young man." The boy smiled shyly and held his sketchbook a little tighter. The father straightened his jacket and addressed the officers one final time. Thank you for responding, but this matter is closed. Then, with a last glance at the pilot, one that carried no anger, only disappointment, he turned and guided his son toward the exit. The pilot stood rooted to the spot, the weight of regret heavy on his shoulders. He knew, without question, that this would not be a day he could forget. He had made a judgment call, and in front of a crowd, in front of his peers, in front of an FAA administrator, that call had been exposed for what it was, a mistake built on assumptions. As father and son walked side by side through the terminal, the boy looked up at his dad and whispered, "Did I do okay?" The father smiled, squeezing his shoulder gently. "You did more than okay. You showed strength in silence. And you reminded everyone here that fairness matters." For the boy, those words meant everything. He wasn't just the child who had been questioned, he was the child who had been defended, believed in, and lifted up in front of everyone. His love for airplanes, instead of being a reason for suspicion, became a reminder of why fairness in the skies mattered so deeply. The tables had turned. And as the crowd slowly dispersed, the story they had just witnessed stayed alive in their minds. Some shook their heads, some smiled, and some whispered to each other about how quickly assumptions could be proven wrong. The pilot remained still, the echo of the father's words ringing in his ears. He walked toward the exit felt different for the boy. Only minutes earlier, he had felt smaller than the chair he sat on, surrounded by stares and whispers. Now, walking beside his father, he felt taller, not because anything had changed in his height, but because of what had just happened. His father's calm strength had shifted the entire moment, and the boy carried that sense of dignity with him like a shield. The crowd slowly went back to their own journeys, yet many eyes still followed them. Some people smiled softly at the boy, some nodded in quiet respect toward the father. Even those who had recorded on their phones lowered them with a new awareness in their expressions. They had not only seen a confrontation, they had seen a lesson unfold in real life. The pilot still stood frozen at the gate. His cap, once tucked confidently under his arm, now hung loosely in his hand. His earlier certainty had vanished. He watched the father and son leave, regret written clearly on his face. He wanted to call out, maybe to apologize again, but the words stuck in his throat. The silence from the crowd told him that any apology now would sound weak, too late. The officers gave the boy and his father a respectful nod as they passed. One officer, trying to recover from the uncomfortable moment, said softly, "Have a good day, sir." The father nodded politely in return, his expression steady, neither angry nor boastful. He had made his point without needing to raise his voice, and the impact was stronger because of it. As they stepped beyond the gate area, the boy finally let out a long breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. His shoulders loosened, and his grip on the sketchbook softened. His father noticed and gave him a gentle smile. "You did very well today," the father said quietly. "You stayed calm. You told the truth. That's all anyone can ask of you." The boy nodded, though his eyes still looked a little sad. "It felt bad, Dad. Like I didn't belong. Everyone was looking at me." The father stopped walking for a moment and knelt slightly so he could look his son in the eye. His voice softened. "Listen to me. You belong anywhere your honesty and dreams take you. Don't let anyone make you feel smaller because of who you are. Those who truly know, will see your worth." The boy's eyes brightened again. He hugged his sketchbook closer, almost like a promise to himself. By now, the story was already spreading among passengers. Some whispered to each other about the father's position, about how quickly the tables had turned. Others shook their heads at the pilot's actions, quietly agreeing that the boy had been wronged. A mother told her teenage son, "You see? Never assume you know someone's story. Always ask first." The boy nodded thoughtfully. Even strangers had taken a lesson from what they had witnessed. Back near the gate, the pilot finally moved. He straightened his jacket and glanced around at the faces still lingering. The disappointment in their eyes stung more than any words. For the first time, he realized that authority, when misused, could crumble in an instant. Meanwhile, the father and son stepped outside into the brighter part of the terminal, where sunlight streamed through tall glass windows. The tension of the past half hour melted into the background. The father gently asked, "Do you still want to see the planes take off before we go?" The boy's face lit up immediately. "Yes," he said eagerly, his earlier fear now replaced by excitement. His father smiled, relieved to see his son's spirit bounce back so quickly. Together they walked toward the observation deck. From there, the boy could see the runway stretching far into the horizon. Planes lined up for departure, their engines humming with power. He opened his sketchbook again, flipping to a clean page. His pencil moved quickly, capturing the wings of a jet lifting off the ground. This time, the act of drawing felt different. It no longer felt like a quiet hobby he had to defend. It felt like a statement of who he was, someone with a passion too strong to be shaken by suspicion. His father stood beside him, watching proudly as the boy sketched. For the boy, the lesson was clear: no matter what others assume, truth and dignity always rise higher. For the father, it was a reminder that children need protection not just from danger, but from unfairness. And for the pilot, though far behind them now, the day would linger as a memory of regret and a powerful reminder of humility. When they finally left the airport together, the boy asked one last question. "Dad, do you think one day I can really be a pilot?" The father smiled warmly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You can be anything you want. And when you do, I hope you remember this day not for the pain, but for the strength you found in yourself. That strength will take you farther than any airplane ever could." The boy grinned, holding his sketchbook like a treasure. He walked taller, steps lighter, already imagining the day when he would soar across the skies in the very planes he loved to draw. The story ended not with anger, but with hope. Hope for a boy whose dreams could not be stopped. Hope for passengers who left with a lesson.